Have you ever thought about how your brain controls your limbs and muscles? Most of the day, your body is constantly moving and you don't even think twice. Imagine if you had to communicate with your skeletal muscle every time to generate the smallest amount of movement. Controlling your muscles is such a natural instinct that you don't even have to think about it. But behind each movement, two major systems of the body work together to generate movement. They are the nervous system and the muscular system. Muscle contraction isn't just a physical action. It's the result of a complex communication system between the brain, nerves, and muscle cells. The brain uses electrical signals to communicate and chemical neurotransmitters to regulate muscle contractions. It all begins with the brain. First, muscle fibers have a signal sent to them by a motor neuron. According to the textbook Neuroscience, edited by Augustine Purves and colleagues, published by Sinora Associates, a motor neuron is a nerve cell that innervates skeletal muscle. A single motor neuron plus the muscle fiber it innervates is called a motor unit. One neuron can innervate multiple fibers, but there are a lot more muscle fibers than neurons, so there is usually a range of a few to many muscle fibers included in a singular motor unit. The larger the motor unit, the more muscle fibers that are innervated by the same motor neuron, and vice versa. The signal that travels down the motor neuron is called an action potential. The action potential travels to the site at which the end of the motor neuron meets the muscle fiber. The space between the neuron and the targeted cell is called the synapse, and the synapse between the motor neuron and muscle fiber is called a neuromuscular junction. According to Marwaha Khalil and colleagues in a 2025 article from StatPros, in the neuromuscular junction, the action potential triggers the release of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a chemical messenger that enables the channeling of electrical impulses from the motor neuron to the muscle fiber. Acetylcholine then binds to the membrane of the muscle fiber, which is known as the sarcolemma. After binding, membrane channels in the sarcolemma open, allowing sodium to enter the cell, while potassium exits the cell. This change in voltage is what creates the electrical impulse. The muscle cell has a couple of structures, and one of the most important ones is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is a structure inside muscle cells that functions as a storage site for calcium. Calcium is a very important chemical in the process of muscle contraction because, according to the Integrated Human Anatomy and Physiology Lab Manual from the Texas A&M Department of Biology, it sets the biochemical events that underlie contraction in motion. Two important proteins inside muscle cells that are crucial to the actual contraction are actin and myosin filaments, and they are highly organized. Also, according to Gerald Cooper in the textbook The Cell, A Molecular Approach, they are responsible for the striated appearance of skeletal muscle. Actin are thin filaments while myosin are thick filaments. They are arranged in a parallel manner with myosin placed in between the actin filaments. Actin is what is being pulled during muscle contraction, while myosin is what pulls the actin to contract the muscle. Myosin filaments have myosin heads protruding from it, which attach to actin filaments in order to pull them. Now back to calcium's role in contraction. After calcium is released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which again occurs after an electrical impulse is created after acetylcholine binds to the muscle cell membrane, calcium then binds to another important protein called troponin. Troponin acts as a sort of gatekeeper. After calcium binds to troponin, the protein changes shape, which causes a shift in another protein called tropomyosin. Tropomyosin covers the myosin head sort of like a blanket, and after calcium binds to troponin and changes its shape, it pulls off the tropomyosin blanket, revealing the myosin heads on the myosin filaments. Now that the myosin heads are revealed, everything is in place to begin a contraction. As described by Axel Fenwick from Johns Hopkins University in the Biophysical Society webpage, the next process is called cross-bridge cycling. What happens is myosin heads attach themselves to the actin filaments, and the myosin filaments begin to pull on the actin, causing the muscle cell to shorten and the muscle to contract. This action can be done on its own though. Myosin heads break down chemical energy known as ATP in order to be able to perform this action. This is a cycle because it is not just a one-time pull. Myosin filaments have two myosin heads protruding from it, and both attach themselves to the actin filaments. Then, They detach and attach again to the next part of the actin filament and pull it again. This causes the muscle cell to shorten even more. This repetitive cycle is what causes muscles to contract and shorten. Finally, it's time to end the muscle contraction, and there's another process for this. According to the Anatomy and Physiology textbook from Oregon State University's Open Educational Resources, muscle relaxation begins when the motor neuron stops sending signals down to the muscle fiber to contract, and the release of acetylcholine stops. Calcium is then stored back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Without calcium, there isn't anything to bind to the troponin, causing the tropomyosin to cover the myosin heads again. Without the myosin heads revealed, they can't attach themselves to the actin filaments, so cross-bridge cycling can't take place. Finally, the muscle cells lengthen and the muscle finally is able to relax. Muscle relaxation is just muscle contraction in reverse, really. We're finally at the end of muscle contraction. By this point, your muscles should be completely relaxed and the very complex process has finally come to an end. What may seem like a simple motion is actually a very complex and coordinated multi-step process. Also, all this occurs in just seconds. Hearing the explanation may make this seem like a very long process, but in reality, the brain sends the signal to contract your muscle in just seconds. And well, contracting your muscles doesn't take very long either. This process is behind every motion that requires muscle contraction. The signal carried out by motor neurons, the release of chemical messengers and other molecules, the cross-bridge cycling, and muscle relaxation. This all occurs many times a day without you having to think about it. Now imagine if you had to think about this process every time you needed to create movement. Understanding how the body moves made me really think about how complex and automated the human body is.